Welcome to Strengthening Our Community Tree Canopy Through Education. This is module number 2, Selecting Trees for the Urban Landscape. The Strengthening Our Community Tree Canopy Through Education series was made possible by a grant through the 2011 National Urban and Community Forestry Grant Program, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and the Florida Forest Service. This module is all about selecting trees for the urban landscape. It's really important that you select a tree that is healthy and structurally sound. There are a number of benefits associated with selecting a tree with good quality structure. First of all, a good quality tree has a better chance of surviving in the landscape. It also has a better chance of living for a long time than a poor quality tree. A good quality tree will establish faster, so it's going to thrive in your landscape sooner than a poor quality one. It's also going to be less likely to fail from structural defects, and that results in less liability, less maintenance, and that equates to less money spent on the tree for the long term. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by a structurally sound tree. There are a couple things that we look for when we're assessing the quality of a tree. We are looking for one straight single leader. If you remember the first module, we discussed codominant stems and multiple trunks. We really want to have just one. The canopy of the tree should have evenly spaced branches and be full and pretty evenly distributed. We're looking for wide branch angles of attachment. So the branches are closer to being parallel to the ground or the horizon as opposed to pointing upwards and competing with that central trunk. When we talk about structurally sound, healthy trees, we're also looking for the tree to be free of any injury, major wounds, as well as pests and diseases. And finally, we want to make sure that we look at the roots as well. We want a root system where the roots grow away from the trunk. They don't grow in a circle or actually girdle the trunk. Here's an example of a really small 3-gallon mahogany tree, typical nursery stock. And you can see this is what we're talking about when we mention a codominant stem. So you can see you don't have one straight central leader. You have two codominant stems that are really competing with each other, and this is going to be a defect over the course of this tree's life. And what happens is as those two codominant stems get bigger, they press against one another and they don't have a great wood attachment. They actually have what we call included bark. So it's just the bark pressing against each other. And that's a really weak point in the tree and is a very common point of failure. So when we have these codominant stems, we could do one of two things. First of all, we can avoid planting this tree and select one that has a better structure. That's a great choice. We can also do pruning to correct the structural defect. And if we fail to do one of those things and these codominant trees get planted in the landscape, this is what the result is. You can see this is two examples of codominant trees in the landscape. The one on the left has maybe 4 or 5 competing leaders. The one on the right has 2 very large competing leaders. And you can see where they're pressing up against one another. That's a very weak point of the tree. That's a place where the tree would be very likely to fail in a windstorm event. This is an example of failure that was caused by codominant stems and included bark. This is a mahogany tree that failed after Hurricane Wilma in 2005 in South Florida. And you can see it had probably 3 competing stems and included bark, and that was the weak point because there's no good wood attachment. You can see the way that the stems were attached, they were actually holding moisture, and the tree was growing roots inside. So this is the result of leaving a codominant tree in the landscape. This tree can't be saved. It's going to need to be removed and replaced, and that's costly, let alone the fact that if somebody had been standing on that sidewalk or driving by when this tree failed, it could have been dangerous as well. And these are the types of failures that we are looking to avoid by selecting quality trees for the landscape and utilizing proper pruning techniques. This is another example of storm failure that is due to codominant stems and included bark. This leaves the center of the tree open to decay. Here's a tree that has fairly good structure in the landscape. You can see that it has, for the most part, one central dominant leader and a fairly balanced canopy. It's not perfect, but it's not necessarily asymmetrical. If you remember, we talked about the angle of branch attachment. The wider the angle is, the stronger the attachment of the branch. So that's why we say we're looking for branches that are nearly parallel to the horizontal or the ground. The image on the left has a much stronger branch attachment than the image on the right. And although the branch on the right is not necessarily another leader, you can see it's competing and it has that included bark, just like some of our previous examples. Rubbing branches are another structural defect that you might notice when selecting trees for the landscape or as the trees mature. The pictures here of the rubbing branches indicate weak points where a failure could be likely. Now let's move on to the part of the tree that is often overlooked, the roots. I mentioned that we're looking for roots that grow straight away from the trunk and don't circle or girdle around the tree. While this is a dissection and obviously a dead tree, this is a great example of what we're looking for. You can see these roots grow straight away from the trunk, and that is a good, healthy, structurally sound root system. The thing about roots is that we often overlook them because we can't see them. We have to actually dig around a little bit to figure out what's going on beneath the soil. Here is an example of a tree that was probably left in the nursery pot a little bit too long, but you can see the contrast between this root system and the previous one we looked at. These roots are circling pretty close around the trunk. They're actually kind of knotted up together. And this is what we would consider a very poor circling root system. You do not want to plant this tree. You can see here, this is what happens when trees with circling root systems are planted in the landscape. The roots can kind of continue to circle around the trunk and they don't expand out into the landscape the way that they should to support a tree as it grows larger. Here's another example of a poor root system. There are a few circling, girdling roots here, and they weren't hiding too far beneath that soil surface. So this is a tree that we would need to be concerned about planting, and maybe we would choose not to plant it, or we would need to correct it through pruning. We have a few options when we do find circling root systems. If the roots are more woody, then we typically need to address them through pruning techniques. But if they're still fairly young and fibrous, we can actually just tease them out at planting. So we can actually help the tree before it develops a severe circling, girdling root system. Now, if you have a root system that grows away from the trunk, but then you have this matted circular root mass on the outside of the root ball, you can actually slice the root ball after planting. This saves a lot of time if you're planting many trees. As you can see in the picture here, what was done is a sharp shovel was used to slice off about the outer inch of the root ball all the way around. That removes a lot of those circling roots, and the roots that are cut off will just decompose into the soil. We'll discuss this more in later modules, but it's important to be aware that planting a tree improperly, even if it has a perfectly good root system free of circling and girdling roots, can actually cause roots to become circling and girdling. So some issues we want to avoid are planting a tree too deep, applying mulch improperly, or planting a tree where it doesn't have adequate room. This concludes module number 2, Selecting Trees for the Urban Landscape.